Hi, good evening. It's Father Alexander here. Welcome back to St. Peter's in Hove and our next step in our walking tour of the book of Genesis, our walking tour through the Bible. I'm going to talk very briefly about chapters 23 and chapters 24 of the book of Genesis. Chapter 23 is a very strange chapter because it goes into enormous detail. It's really quite tedious about how Sarah dies. Well, she's very ancient, and she has to be buried. And Abraham enters into negotiations with a man called Ephron and buys a burial site for Sarah. And this burial site, we're told very, very clearly where it is. It's 23:17. Ephron's field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field and the cave in it, and all the trees anywhere within the boundaries of the field passed into Abraham's possession in the sight of the Hittites of all the inhabitants of his town. After this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And so the field and the cave of it passed from the Hittites into Abraham's possession as a burial site of his own. And of course, we have a lot of negotiations and so on, and payment, and we're told exactly how much it costs. 400 shekels of silver, whatever a shekel is. Well, 400 shekels of silver is presumably quite a lot. According to, we're told, according to the current commercial rate. Now, this is Abraham, as we know, is a nomad. So he lives in a tent, and we've had lots of mentions of tents. He moves around, though he tends to move around Beersheba. There are lots of places where he stays, but Beersheba seems to be, he sort of gravitates around that area. Now, at Hebron, he buys this field. So he at last becomes a property owner. But the only real reason he buys a field is, of course, to bury Sarah in the cave. Now, this is interesting in that the author is going out of his way to show that Abraham bought this field, Abraham possessed this field, he was recognized as possessing the field, he paid for it, it was all done properly and above board, and his wife, and then later he himself, was buried in the field. In chapter 25, we have yet another mention of the field. Abraham dies, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah facing Mamre in the field of Ephron the Hittite, son of Zohar. This was the field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites, and Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried there. Well, now, this is really quite interesting. That field is still with us. Obviously, there was a place, and that cave is still with us. And if you look them up on the internet, Tomb of Abraham, you'll discover it is a very famous mosque in Hebron. Yes, it's a mosque. It's not a synagogue, it's a mosque, and it's not a church. And this mosque is deeply, deeply contested, or rather access to this mosque is deeply contested by our Jewish brethren, particularly our very religious Jewish brethren. And there's a whole sort of shemozzle about Jews wanting to pray at the tomb of Abraham and the Muslims not letting them, and the Jews having a sort of access to the holy site of Abraham and Sarah's tombs, and indeed the tombs of the other patriarchs. And yet, this is all, if you like, foretold in the book of Genesis, because the person who's writing the book of Genesis about Abraham's tomb really does seem to be taking the view that we must put all these details down because one day this will be contested. Now, in many cultures, not just in the Middle East, but also in Africa, it's a fact that if your ancestors are buried in a certain place, that place belongs to you. The fact that you have your ancestors buried there is a sign that this is your land and that you have possession of this land. It is the land of your ancestors. In other words, this is your connection with the soil, the fact that your ancestors are buried there. So Abraham, by burying Sarah and then later by being buried himself, is making a claim on Hebron. He's making a claim on the land. So if you like, it's the first fruits, it's an earnest of the fact that Abraham's descendants are going to inherit the whole land. That's just the way the scripture is. Now, of course, to us Catholics, this is not particularly interesting, I have to say, So what if Abraham is buried there? King Alfred the Great is buried somewhere in Winchester. That means Winchester belongs to us, West Saxons. Well, yeah, I suppose so. It really doesn't concern us this very much. And we English, because of the Industrial Revolution and all these other things, and because also we English Catholics, because we're Catholics, which means universal, which means international, we don't have this very strong sense of being attached to the land. It's been very much attenuated. In places like Italy, it's much stronger. And in places like the Middle East, it's very strong indeed. The other thing is, if you were a biblical fundamentalist, and incidentally, biblical fundamentalism is not something that goes with Catholicism at all well, biblical fundamentalism is something that many non-Catholics and indeed anti-Catholics attribute to Catholics, but it's simply not true. We are not biblical fundamentalists. We believe the Bible has to be interpreted. But if you are a biblical fundamentalist, the fact that Abraham is buried at Hebron does give you the idea very strongly that the Promised Land is, in fact, the Promised Land belongs to our Jewish brethren, and therefore gives you a divine imprimatur, a divine approval for the state of Israel as it currently exists. Now, I don't think that any Catholic would be entirely comfortable with that. However, in many parts of the Bible Belt of America, that is exactly what they believe. And so therefore this passage has enormous political import today. It's quite extraordinary that the passage written thousands of years ago actually plays a part in American elections today. But it does, you know. So then, of course, we have the marriage of Isaac, which comes out in the next chapter, which I have spoken about. And here we have another, whereas the whole tomb thing is about the claim to the land. The marriage of Isaac is about the purity of the tribe. Isaac marries Rebekah, who is the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. So she's his cousin once removed. He has to marry in and not marry out. Now, for our Jewish brethren, this is very, very important. If you marry out, what you're doing is essentially producing children who won't be Jewish, who won't be Hebrews. Therefore, you must marry in order to increase the Hebrew community. And that seems fair enough. And we Catholics, too, believe in marrying in, not marrying out. It's always much better if you marry a Catholic, because there's much greater chance that your children will be Catholic after you. It's called endonymy, opposed to exogamy. So we should be promoting that, as a matter of fact, you know, although you don't often hear it promoted, but it's something that should be promoted. It's not racist to insist that Jews, if you're Jewish, to insist to promote marriage with other Jews. That's not racist at all. And similarly, it's not narrow-minded to promote marriage between Catholics. In fact, it's a rather good idea. One of the reasons why you have youth clubs, or at least you used to have youth clubs in Catholic schools, so that Catholics will marry other Catholics. So there we are. We've got two very interesting themes there. That one of Catholics marrying other Catholics is very much a theme of the 19th century. During the 19th century, the clergy were very, very keen to promote Catholic marriage, Catholic to Catholic marriage, and to dissuade people from marrying out. My father married my mother, who was not a Catholic, and it was very much disapproved of at the time. Whereas, of course, some of my uncles married Catholics, and you know, it was always considered much better. I don't know. Well, my parents didn't do too badly, did they? They produced me. So there we are. Thanks for watching. Bye.